Welcome to the SoLoMo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Cory O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, tactics, and tools related to social, local, and mobile marketing and advertising. Our goal is to give you the information you need to be a better marketer. Today is Wednesday, May 22nd, 2013, and this is episode number 70.
In this episode, we're going to discuss Google I/O, Yahoo buying Tumblr, Flickr going free, YouTube opening up streaming to anyone, and much more. Do we really have much more beyond that, Cory? I mean, I think just a little bit more, not much more.
I mean, those are broad topics. So the much more often covers, the deep down nitty gritty of what we're going to be discussing. Because, something, it's easy to say, oh, Yahoo buying Tumblr. Well, that's 3 words, but there's a lot that rolls into that story. Or Flickr goes free. That sounds nice. Flickr's now roaming the countryside, free to do as it wants. But what does that actually mean?
I actually thought we should be adding to this the whole GIF versus GIF story. Have you been seeing that all over the web the last couple of days?
I have, actually. And I think it was funny because, we talked about how, the White House, when they got on Tumblr, they were like, all right, it's GIF. And then the guy that invented it came out and he was like, it's GIF. And then the peanut butter was like, it's GIF. And so I'm imagining this, battle of, Barack Obama on one side and, a giant thing of Jif peanut butter on the other, and they're like, "We will own this image format," and they're going at it. That was the mental image that I had. I'm sure you had probably the same.
I kind of wondered how long this sort of the inventor of the image format, how long he stayed in seclusion before getting pissed off and frustrated every single time he saw somebody mentioning GIF instead of GIF, and then eventually came out of seclusion and decided to make this announcement that's now trending on all these major sort of tech sites as well as on Twitter and so on. I think it's kind of interesting how important it seems to be to so many of the online media outlets and social networks.
Yeah, I'm sticking with GIF. I think, graphic, it's a hard G. That's the sound I'm going to use. And you can use whatever you want, but I'm going with GIF.
Well, they might be coming for you. The GIF police might be coming for you. But what do we got on deck this week?
Quite a few things, the biggest of which was Google I/O, the yearly Google Developer Conference, happened last week and had some interesting... Wait, was it last week or was it...
I think it was in the early part of last week. It was shortly after last week's show, so that's why we didn't get to it till now.
There we go. It feels like so much has happened between then and now, but it's crazy to think that it was just last week that Google I/O happened.
Is it Google or is it Jugal? No.
So Google I/O. One of the interesting things that they announced was a number of statistics. So we're gonna start off with that for our stats of the week, and these were pulled from a TechCrunch article. But TechCrunch, one of the many news organizations that were covering it, they by no means got the exclusive on these numbers. These were numbers that were publicly shared as part of the Google I/O conference. But just wanted to talk about the overall health of the Google infrastructure and the Google network and their systems and everything that they're kind of working on. So the big numbers that I pulled out were 48 billion Android applications have been installed. 48 billion, quickly approaching 50 billion, which... Interestingly enough, Apple just recently crossed the 50 billion mark and made a big to-do about it. And so, surprisingly, in terms of number of apps installed, Android has caught up. And I think that, this definitely surprised a few people. There were some really? They're almost even with Apple in terms of apps installed. So, that's certainly a thriving marketplace out there. And those 48 billion are spread out across 900 million activated Android devices. So, whether it's a tablet, a smartphone, all the various things that are running Android now, 900 million activations out in the world. So on the mobile side, definitely strong. And then on the sort of desktop or device side, they had 750 million active Chrome users. So 750 million active Chrome users, which is a ton considering that, Chrome still relatively new in the browser world. I guess the newest of the big boys in that space. And then last but not least, they announced a official number for monthly active users of the Google Plus Stream, which is interesting because a lot of times they announce, Google Plus users, and it's like, well, they they accidentally clicked on a Google Plus button in their Gmail once, and hey, we get to call them a user for another month. But they announced that 190 million people access the Google Plus stream every month, which is a pretty strong number, and I think shows the strength of that system. And it's a number that's definitely hard to ignore. So 190 million. Despite the fact that a lot of the techies and a lot of the blog publishers, that sort of thing, they themselves and their circle of friends might not be using it. There are certainly quite a few people out there using Google Plus. So, still not something to discount by any means, because Google is putting a lot of effort towards it. And with the numbers out of the way, why don't we dive into the meat of Google I/O, as that was our main topic as well. So, covered some stats. So let's talk about what it actually means, what they announced, what it seems like their focus was, maybe what was, conspicuously, I believe is the right word, conspicuously ignored or not talked about. Adam, what was your big takeaway from Google I/O? Anything that stuck out? Anything that you were like, really interesting that they said that?
I think I was actually quite surprised overall. Before, when you and I were sort of talking about this episode before we got on here, you sort of said the keynote was 3 hours long. Just obviously trying to sort of digest it and even have an opportunity to watch it. It's about as long as a Lord of the Rings movie if you are really into that. In my opinion, I got to watch a number of it. I was watching it while I was doing work, and I got to watch most of it is what I meant. And I actually was really surprised about everything overall. There was an article or something titled Death by 1,000 Cuts. And it was related to the conference and sort of how Google went after lots and lots of spaces and were showing traction in lots and lots of places. So to me, that's sort of what stood out is, and I think we should sort of do the rundown. The TechCrunch article does a good job of sort of compartmentalizing some of the topics that they talked about. But I think, quickly, if we start off by talking about Android, I think between showing how much traction Android has and additionally the really much more polished UI and feature set and everything that is being provided by the more recent releases of the Android operating system. And then sort of just in the end, cap it off with the fact that they launched this sort of unlocked, completely open Samsung Galaxy 4 device for folks as a way to sort of prove beyond their Nexus 4 Google, quote unquote, Google phone that they already have unlocked and available, that they're trying to get Android devices into as many people's hands as possible and give them no excuse.
Kinda, but I mean, to be fair, the unlocked, unbranded Samsung Galaxy S4 Google version or whatever they end up calling it, it's $650. So it's not like
sure.
They said, hey, you get this great phone and it's only going to be $200, but it's on contract.
I agree.
It was like, sure, you could buy an unlocked iPhone and it's going to cost you $700. So I agree. I think it was interesting to see them do that and essentially take a partner phone and say, I don't know if they're doing some sort of back deal where they're like, hey, we'll just give you $20 for every one of these things that you sell or whatever, but. Yes, they stripped the Samsung part of the Samsung phone out, but it's still a pretty hefty investment for most people.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the sort of the least of it when it comes to the mobile devices. I think it's definitely about the operating system and the amount of installs that they have. They're proving, like you said, that they can compete with Apple in that sense, and that I think the experience is starting to finally feel comfortable for folks who were expecting a more polished experience from the very beginning. And I'm a huge Apple fan. We've already talked about this number of times over the last year of the SoLoMo show. Does anything at least in regards to the mobile stuff around Android make you feel like playing around with it at all, or going to the other side or anything?
Not really. And actually, I wish I need to find it. It was an interesting article about somebody who was sort of saying, Google created Android they developed Android because they could see this change coming. They could see Apple gaining strength, and they were like, all right, if we don't play in the smartphone market, one of our biggest competitors is going to entirely control the mobile space, and so we need to put a lot of effort there to make sure that it's not one player controlling the entire thing. So they created Android, they built it. But now it's sort of, it's peaked a little bit. It's like, well, we've done it now. Like, we've got millions of Android phones out there. We've got millions and billions of applications being downloaded. Like, we did it. But the risk is that it's no longer the shiny object at Google. It's no longer the challenge of like, oh, we gotta, fight Apple. We've got to do all these things. It's like, well, we won. Our goals are accomplished. It's now a two-horse race, and for the near future, at least, it's going to continue to be that way. And we've got partners kind of doing our bidding for us and all this stuff. But the risk is, well, okay, now Android's kind of set, so let's take all our power players and move them into Google Plus and move them into Hangouts and back onto Maps. And the cornucopia of things that Google announced, they definitely didn't have this like Android is our focus.
No,
this whole thing, it all points back to Android. It was like, here's some cool things on Android, but let's talk about all this other stuff we're doing. And don't you remember Chrome? We've got the Chrome Pixel, and that's still around, and all this stuff. And it was like, I would say it's not an imminent threat. It's not like they entirely ignored it, and everybody was like, holy crap, like what happened to Android? But I could definitely see that coming true of, Android no longer being the shiny object, and maybe they deprioritize it in terms of the smartest people in Google and what they're working on. So throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. And I would say to me, I mean, and again, our audience here, people who are listening are interested to hear about the marketing side or the advertising side of things, right? And I think in the past, we've talked about sort of the mobile web versus native apps and which native app platform to go for and so on. And we would probably almost always initially recommend iOS for a number of reasons. But they also released the developer tool, and I forgot what it's called. Something I think is it Android Studio. Yeah, that's what it
Android
is.
Studio.
And so I can only assume, because I haven't actually dove in to take a real deep look at it, that it's very, very similar to the very, very well done and very well packaged iOS SDK. And the whole system around developing for iOS, which just really packages everything to make it super easy for you. And I believe that is what their attempt is to do with Android Studio, which I think begs the attention of folks who maybe haven't taken a look at Android as a developing platform in the past, because it really has been a rougher place to traverse in comparison to iOS. What do you think about that, Cory?
Yeah, it felt a little bit, they were going after internationalization was a big part of Android Studio. So you can now get your app in there. They're doing some sort of automated system where you can kind of write it in English and then send it out there and have other people helping kind of write your app into different languages, which is really interesting. But they had things that were really intriguing. So, there's certain languages where the words are generally longer. And so if you need to look at those words inside of your application and realize like, oh, when all these words get really big, my menu breaks. And so you could adjust font weights on the fly across, it would show like, here's what your application looks like in 12 different languages. And then you'd be like, okay, well, these 9 work and these 3 seem to be breaking. So let me adjust small things on those versions. So that was interesting. And then it also tried to address the sort of, the fact that Android runs on all these different types of devices. And so it had a way of emulating, okay, here's what it's going to look like on a tablet and a big phone and a small phone and a square phone. And it sort of resized and repurposed your application into all these different layouts and trying to make that process a little bit smoother and easier. It's not like drag and drop, so it's not like they came out and they're like, all right, anybody can now build an application and you'll be live 24 hours from now. So yeah. I think it's still, you need developers, you need a talented team to build an application, but hopefully that process is a little shorter, a little cheaper, which for any company dealing with mobile apps is always a nice thing to hear.
So I think beyond the Android stuff, which I honestly think is sort of the thing that most people, it's the least earth-shattering, I guess you would say. To me, some of the biggest things had to do with the mobile web. And when I say that, I don't mean apps. I don't mean on Android specifically. I mean the whole demonstration and segment of the keynotes that were talking about Chrome and the mobile web and Google's investment in making the mobile web really the next frontier, which feels really funny that we say it's the next frontier, that the web would be that rather than apps. And I remember Google sort of betting on a couple years ago that, or a number of of sort of people on the web, thought leaders saying that the web is ultimately where things are going to go, and it's apps versus web at this point in time, and that people are going through that phase of using apps right now, but the web is where it's going to be, and sort of trying to see where those signals are for that to happen. And what they've done what Google was showing was some really interesting ways that they were making the browser. They were doing a few things. So for one, they were trying to introduce one of their new video formats and their new image format. So the new video format, I think, is VP9, I think it is. And then the image format is called WebP. I guess P is supposed to stand for photo instead of, like WebI for image or something like that. But both of them had shown considerable. They did a considerable job of crunching the files and making them as much as a third the size that they originally were, both the video and the images. And what that does is it enables the same processing power on mobile devices, which have to churn on all that data, and also the data connections, which would then eat a lot of bandwidth for folks that don't have unlimited bandwidth, which there's plenty of folks all around the world, and including the US, that are paying for their data. And then also that speeds up downloads. So those sorts of things affect, a number of different sort of obstacles that are facing folks who are primarily using the mobile web or who will continue to increasingly use the mobile web. So they're trying to introduce this and really, really push this. And it's going to take a lot for them to get that out there and get adopted by these other companies, because that's also going to include, is that going to be easy and incompatible with something like, obviously, Apple's devices? Is it something that some large folks that use images like what we're talking about, Flickr and even Facebook, who has actually, to my knowledge, started to experiment with WebP as the image format, are they going to start using this? And is it going to be a smooth transition? For instance, I've already heard of folks who have been complaining that they take down images from, say, Facebook and want to edit them, and they can't sometimes because they're randomly being experimented upon with WebP and Photoshop, for instance, and some of these other image editors don't actually support WebP. So they also showed a couple other things where they had multiple devices laid down next to each other. They were trying to show how that their browser and the sort of interactive platform that they were wrapping around it could be platform agnostic and let them sort of work together. And so they had this touch racing game. I don't know, Cory, if you got to see that at all.
I saw it a little bit, which I was like, yeah, it's kind of cool, but there's been games like that before, and yeah, they weren't across the different platforms, but...
And that was on the web, though. That wasn't an app, right? That was what was astounding about it, is it was the web. It wasn't actually applications installed on each of the devices.
Right.
And so that was the amazing thing, is they would line up all these devices, the devices then connected to show this sort of soapbox racetrack around all of them, and then each person was able to touch their screen and release their screen in order to drive the soapbox car around the entire track, which again is connected from everybody. And between that and this sort of Lord of the Rings demo that they did, where they were showing people both on a computer, on a desktop with a mouse, and on a tablet with their fingers, fighting 3D trolls and sort of using it to advertise the next upcoming Lord of the Rings movie, they were really trying to show that the things that you normally expected to be only really doable on the web, on native apps, were definitely doable on the mobile web across devices, across platforms, even because they were showing it on an iOS device as one of them, and across form factors because of responsive design and that sort of thing. So to me, that was almost beyond the sort of things that they've been doing with Google Plus, which I think I'm going to let you jump into, Cory, but beyond the Google Plus updates, the mobile web stuff that they were showing was really, to me, the sort of glimpse into the near future and the far future of what they're trying to push in regards to experiences, and how marketers can take advantage of that to not have somebody go through the hoops of downloading an app or any of that sort of thing, but actually jump directly into an experience right away just by having a browser up on their device.
Yeah, so you mentioned Google Plus. I'll dive into that because I was actually pretty impressed, I will say. Google Plus before, even just visually, it never really fit with me. Like I'd load it up and I'm like, it didn't click for whatever reason, but they essentially rebranded it to look a lot like Pinterest. It's almost like Pinterest meets Tumblr meets Facebook. It's this really interesting mashup. They're really going after the card layout that they've established with Google Now. and really across a lot of their platforms now, where everything is sort of a block, a unit of information. But what's interesting is it provides a lot of information on one screen. So depending on the size of your browser, it's either 2 or 3 columns, and those kind of scale. And Google's doing some really weird things with scaling, but that's probably a whole other episode that I could complain and moan about all their weird scaling stuff. But it sort of adapts the page to the browser size that you have and actually shows a lot of stuff. And then they're doing some interesting things with like highly engaged photos that span across multiple columns to kind of call those out. But overall, just, really visually appealing. It shows a lot more information on the screen. It makes it more interesting and useful to scroll through. So I think some strong changes there, and something that, for myself at least, definitely made me kind of reconsider and say, hey, maybe it's time to check out Google Plus again and visit it regularly and see if there's a little more action going on there than I would have first assumed, because, it's not like, well, not only is there nothing there, but it's like terrible to look at and really confusing. It's smoothing out a lot, and they're fixing a lot of the earlier issues that kind of prevented me from going there frequently.
Yeah, and this look and feel was on the tablet. It was on the iPad, the sort of multi-tiled approach versus the single stream. This is sort of bringing it over to the desktop. I don't think the stream is as big of a sort of deal, although I think that the fact that we've only seen, Google Plus has been around for 2 years, less than 2 years, and they've already sort of really iterated upon the look and feel and the user interface. It's like 3 times already. The initial launch, there was the second time where they sort of completely changed the left-hand side, and then this time where they again sort of changed the whole look and feel and then added this multi-column thing. But to me, the bigger deal was actually sort of the content discovery that's been introduced through this sort of related hashtags and the content that flips over. And so now you can see hashtags, and then you can also see related content and related hashtags that get dynamically introduced to you and suggested to you when you're looking at some content. So to me, as a marketer, that to me is an interesting way of sort of, it's kind of brings some viability to Google Plus as a place that I could have my content discovered more on the fly, rather than it's not a place where I have to do something systematically to make it be seen. I can create content that has hashtags, and it could potentially have more reach to it simply because Google Plus is really leveraging the hashtags and things related to it and their whole sort of knowledge engine behind it to show related content. So now you can, for instance, take a look at one post and then actually flip it around, that post, it'll flip over to the back and show you a number, sort of a carousel or slide deck of other posts that you can see that are related to it, not specifically because it's the same author. It's a related topic, or it's a related hashtag. And that to me is sort of interesting. It depends on how many people actually go as far as to use that. But it really extends the content discovery opportunities.
That's the name of the game for marketing, is content discovery. So I think they're doing, we've seen hashtags work with Instagram in terms of getting the message out there. So if Google Plus can do it, more power to them. And for myself, I've never been one that's like, oh, a hashtag, I'll click on that and like just see what other people are randomly posting about that. I think there's very specific cases. I think we talked about that photo a day thing on Instagram that I used to do. That occasionally I would look at those, but it doesn't fit with my own use of it, but it certainly seems like other people are using it that way. And so from a marketing perspective, it's definitely something that's interesting and worthy of keeping an eye on and watching how that evolves over time.
So would you say Google Plus is, I've always said I'm fairly, bullish about it and pro Google Plus, and I think they're in it for the long haul, although I wouldn't necessarily say that I go there that often. I've been going there more and more recently. What are your thoughts on that now as they sort of evolve?
It's funny. I don't think, this isn't like, oh, it's the saving of Google Plus. It's now going to take over Facebook and be the thing that everybody's using. But I also think that it's good sign. So it's not like, okay, well, 6 months from now, it seems like it's going to be dead. It seems like they're in it for the long haul. They're positioning themselves for continued growth, and they're not going after this hockey stick thing where it's like, okay, well, now we're at 200 million, but next year we wanted to be at $1 billion. They're like, okay, well, 200, 300, 400. We'll keep iterating. We'll keep trying things. We'll keep, layout changes and mobile applications and pushing and pushing and pushing. So I think I see it growing in strength, but I don't see it being, suddenly a switch gets flipped and we're all using Google Plus and it's perfect. I think it's going to have to be that they just keep pushing and they just keep pretending, or they, act like you're the biggest player in the room and eventually you might become that. So I think they're going to keep going after it. And if they stick with it for long enough, they've got a solid opportunity on their hands here.
Would you recommend for brands to be using Google Plus?
Yes, but I don't think that recommendation ever changed. I always recommend that brands at least be semi-active on Google Plus for the search benefits, and that was always true and still is true. I don't think that's changed. I don't think it's increased. I don't think it's decreased. It still has search benefits. You can still do similar types of content. I would say the change might be this sort of additional content discovery element of things like hashtags and related content and that sort of thing, but it's still a wait and see on that one. So got to see how usage is, if people actually adapt to it, or if it's like we all forget that a month from now and pretend like that never happened.
Got it.
All right, well, that is quite a few Google I/O things. The one thing that we didn't cover, because neither did Google, is hardware, which was interesting. They did talk about that, debranded Android phone. They sort of acknowledge that glass exists, though no one in the keynote was wearing glass, which was an interesting omission. But Google, despite being previously a company that focused a lot on hardware, didn't really talk a lot about it, and it was interesting because it is a developer-focused event, so they get a little bit of a pass there. But again, I think that's sort of this whole concept of maybe Android has lost a little bit of the focus that it used to have, because they didn't trot out hey, these are our 10 great new phones, and check out these awesome new screens that you're going to be able to develop for, and they're so fast, and it's got all this cool Wi-Fi technology. It was like, we took the Samsung part off a Samsung phone, and hey, everybody's installing apps, and congratulations, it seems to be working. So, Adam, did you notice the fact that they didn't touch hardware? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, they did try to sort of highlight the Pixel laptop, I think, as you said, and that was something they gave away to everybody else, and so on. I actually don't think of their conferences as being a hardware conference when I go when I listen to it, excuse me, in contrary to, Apple's, I always think of the hardware, and then I sort of think of software as being the add-on to those when they talk about it, like the upcoming probably announcement related to iOS 7. So yeah, I wasn't that surprised.
Well then, let's dive into a couple of lightning rounds, because this is going to be the most hard-hitting, most action-packed lightning round that we have had in a while. There are some big stories. So I'll put 60 seconds on the clock. What do you say we just dive right in?
Let's do it.
All right, ready and go. So the first story we've got is Yahoo buying Tumblr for $1.1 billion, which in my mind I think is... I bet that point one was like a negotiation. They're like, hey, Instagram was $1 billion. All these companies were $1 billion. We want to be 1.1 so that we're not the same. We're a little better. But, regardless of that, Yahoo, in their announcement post, Marissa Mayer said, we promise not to screw it up, which I think was interesting. It's a fickle network. It's something where, the users of Tumblr feel a lot of ownership over it. There's going to be a tightrope to walk for a while of Yahoo clearly wants to buy it and integrate advertising. Users seemingly don't want ads. There's going to have to be some sort of middle ground. It'll be interesting to see where that middle ground lands. There's a lot of not safe for work content on Tumblr. How do they sort that out? Because you don't want to be running your ads next to that. So I think this is going to be fascinating to watch over the next 6 months, because with $1 billion investment, they're obviously focused on it. All right, Adam, with 60 seconds on the clock, what's your take on Yahoo's purchasing of Tumblr? Ready and go.
I was sort of rooting for him, but I didn't quite think it would happen, and it did on Monday. I am actually a fan of Marissa Mayer, and I think that she, having the Google pedigree as well, will do some really great stuff with the company, and I think she has so far. So the purchase, I think, is good. Tumblr is a little bit under the radar for some of the more, I guess you'd say the older marketers around. I mean, I'm even talking about my age and up. I think that it's for the younger crowd, but there's lots and lots of energy going on. And they only recently announced an advertising sort of initiative, because they really haven't found a way to monetize the platform at all. So with these sort of ads that we discussed a few episodes back, I think it's a little bit of a blessing that Yahoo now can keep them alive for some time, and then also better integrate and monetize the platform with Yahoo's advertising partners.
All right, well said, well said. It does seem like they're going to keep it alive, which is nice. It's not an acquire, shut down, keep the talent. It's like, hey, we want to keep this going. We want to figure out how to make it work. So
it's very YouTube-like, right? Google got them, and you don't really feel that much of a change. You just they're alive, and they keep kicking and have a lot of resources pumped into them.
Yep, indeed. All right, 60 seconds back on the clock for story number 2. Ready and go. So speaking of big acquisitions, a while back, Yahoo also acquired a small photo startup called Flickr. Flickr, being the leading online photo sharing site, had been facing a lot of challenges recently. It felt a little stagnant. They hadn't made any big announcements lately. And so they changed that by making a gigantic announcement to the tune of 1 terabyte of free storage for every single user. Not just paid users, everyone. You get a terabyte, you get a terabyte, you get a terabyte. They just hand it out now. The trick is the 1 terabyte account comes with ads, so you can store all your photos there, but there are going to be ads. You can pay $50 a year to go ad-free, and then you can pay, I think it's something like $400 a year to get a 2nd terabyte, which is kind of crazy, but hey, if you need it, you probably need it. They also updated their mobile app, so Flickr seems to be, once again, something that Yahoo actually cares about, which is really nice. I like Flickr, I'm a fan of it, and I hope it continues to grow. All right, Adam, what's your take on the Flickr announcements? Good or too late? Ready and go.
I think it's a little interesting when I hear people say, oh, this is too late. It's like, what? It's too late. You're going to, why? Because you found alternatives? I mean, maybe that's the case, but I haven't ever dove into any of the other photo sharing communities myself. And you know, a couple months back when they came out with a new app for the iOS platform, I said that I thought that was pretty awesome in a number of different ways, and I was sort of waiting for it to happen on the web, and it was a bit of a surprise the way that they timed it. The 1 terabyte of data, and you know, not making folks pay for it. Previously, it was $30 a year for sort of kind of, I don't know if it was unlimited space, but it was a lot of space. But 1 terabyte of data is huge. They show sort of a slider as you're on the homepage showing that if you were uploading a bunch of full resolution 16 megapixel images, you'd still be able to upload something like 20 or 30,000 photos at that high resolution. I didn't know it was ad supported, and so that's obviously sort of showing the ad play that they're trying to do for both Flickr and also for Tumblr. So it seems like Yahoo's trying to do that for potentially all the new platforms are going for, is let's get eyeballs there, and then let's start monetizing it with ads, which I'm not really always a fan of that approach.
Yeah, but, you know, to be fair, if you've got a media department, it might be time to call up your Yahoo rep and say, I heard you guys got some interesting things going on. Let's set up a meeting and talk through some of those.
That's true, actually. Totally true. Totally true.
All right, one more story to get to today. 60 seconds on the clock. Ready and go. So the last story we've got is YouTube opening up live streaming to essentially every channel. It's not quite. It's open to any channel that has 1,000 or more subscribers. But I think this is interesting, not necessarily for the announcement. I don't know, there's a lot to do here. You know, most brands, like doing live streaming content on YouTube is way beyond what they're currently looking at. For a lot of brands, it's like, just figure out how to get a pre-recorded YouTube video that gets a lot of views. And, you know, live stream, there's a ton of challenges there. But I think it's more interesting what it symbolizes for YouTube, which is that they're continuing to make this push beyond sort of the 30-second cat video or, you know, the 2 minutes sort of rants that got it popular, and moving more into just an entertainment channel. They're continuing to invest in longer form content. This live streaming thing is sort of, you know, the competitor to live TV. So I think YouTube is a channel that a lot of brands should continue to focus on and continue to look for opportunities there. All right, Adam, 60 seconds on the clock. What do you take? What's your take on the YouTube live streaming functionality? Ready and go.
I'm actually really wondering why it's taking them so long to just sort of offer to anybody and compete with Ustream and with Livestream as sort of the primary bigwigs when it comes to live event streaming. I'm wondering why they don't release it to everybody. Maybe the sheer scale of users that are on there, if they all decided to start streaming stuff on it, it would just weigh things down. And that's why, because 1,000 subscribers isn't really terrible for even smaller folks. I mean, the major folks that are really chock full of subscribers up in the tens and hundreds of thousands of subscribers. So 1,000 isn't too far reaching for some smaller companies and brands if they're producing great content. But I'm really waiting for the day for them to just sort of open the door for everybody to do it, because they're already doing it through Google Plus. I mean, we're streaming this show right now on a Google Hangout, which ultimately goes on to is on YouTube as well, both live and then recorded after the fact.
Yes, indeed. We'll see. I think, they're probably working their way to cut that number down. It's tough to get to 0 because then you get people that just sign up for spam accounts and put crap out there that clogs up their whole network. But I could see them getting down.
Come on. YouTube is filled with great people that are always positive. Come on. What are you talking about?
Especially the commenters. YouTube commenters are some of the smartest, most genuine. No.
I'm going to like to see the comments on this video after that.
There you go. Bring it on. All right. Well, with that, we will we'll bring this episode to a close. There are a lot of great stuff that we covered this week, and there's plenty more to think about. A lot of things are in the process of unfolding. Google I.O., tons that's going on there that's going to sort of be happening over the next couple months. So, as always, a lot to think about. But hey, if you listen to this episode and you thought to yourself, I got a question for those guys, or maybe you said, that really made me think of something. I'd love if they covered a topic in a future episode. Or, hey, maybe you just got feedback for us, or even if you want to say hi. We definitely encourage you to get in touch. We try to make that easy. There's a number of ways to reach us, and probably the easiest is via Twitter. So both Adam and myself can be reached at SoLoMo Show, or I can be reached directly. I'm at Cory O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi. We also can be reached both via email. It's SoLoMoshow@gmail.com. That's SoLoMoShow@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page where we share stuff related to the show and stuff in between the show that we find interesting and we think you guys might find interesting as well. We're also on Google Plus, and we have a Pinterest account where we do our best to share our videos that we make, our shows. We do them in a sort of YouTube-esque style with audio and some images corresponding to that beyond our live stream that we also do on YouTube. And so we put that up there so you can repin those to your heart's delight.
There we go. And all the links that we discussed today, as well as the links to the social channels that we just mentioned, can be found in the show notes, which are available at either solomoshow.com or in your podcast player of choice. So take a look around. You should be able to find the show notes. Always a lot of good stuff there, some supplementary links, and just a way of diving deeper into each of the stories that we covered today. And with that, we will call this episode a wrap, and we hope that you join us next week for another episode of The SoLoMo Show.
Take care.